Welcome back to Psychedelics Today, everybody. This is Joe. Today on the show, we have Kyle Buller. I interview him, and we get into some background story on why he is involved in this podcast and what he's up to professionally and academically. It's a really fun interview. We get into a lot of really interesting material. I think you guys are going to like it a lot. Let us know what you think. You can subscribe on iTunes or on Stitcher. You can also follow us on Facebook. If you have any need to get in touch or want to share some stories or reach out for any reason, email is info@psychedelicstoday.com. Thanks for listening.
I'm originally from New Jersey. I grew up in Northwest New Jersey over by the Delaware Water Gap. So a little bit farm country. Not typical Jersey Shore or Jersey City.
Okay, you did not know Snooki growing up.
No, I did not.
That's too bad.
And yeah, and now I'm living in Vermont, so that's a pretty common question. I get up here sometimes.
Oh, did you grow up with her? Yeah, no. That's cool. So, how did you end up at UVM? Did you just want to be in Vermont, like you liked it when you were growing up, so you wanted to go up there?
No, I actually went to Burlington College.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, Burlington College. So that was a really interesting story. I originally came up to Burlington during my junior year. I checked out Champlain with a friend of mine, and he was thinking about going to Champlain. I just came for the ride. And a few years later, I knew that wasn't really my thing. And so I went out, I drove out to Colorado. I was thinking about becoming like a ski bum out there. And I checked out a couple schools out there. I wanted to go to this school, Colorado Mountain College. And then I thought about going to Europa. And then a bunch of events started to unfold. And I really started getting into like the transpersonal psychology stuff. And Burlington College was one of those few colleges that offered a transpersonal psychology program. And I thought it was kind of ironic that I checked out Burlington, back when I was in high school.
Right. All right. So you are a snowboarder still, and I guess we can get to the crux of like what happened for you.
Yeah.
So you had a bad snowboard accident at one point. Can you tell us about it and what happened?
Yeah, sure. So it was New Year's Eve. I always get the dates confused. It was I think it was New Year's Eve of 2003, on the cusp of 2004. And I was 16. I was a sophomore in high school, and didn't really want to go out partying or anything like that. So got on my snowboard, went out with my brother and his friend, and out in the Poconos, a ski resort called Camelback. And my brother's friend ended up falling like only a few hours in, kind of hit his head. He was wearing a helmet, I think, and just kind of needed to take a break. So since we just got there a few hours ago, I was like, all right, let's take one more run and then we'll go. I guess I was being a little bit selfish. So I planned out the run and said, this is what we'll do, and then we'll just call it a night. And if you're a skier or snowboarder, the golden rule is to never say last run. But I didn't know that at the time. So we went up, tried to outline that last run, and I was going down a trail called the Nile Mile, and I was just going around this turn really fast, and there was just a mound of snow in a blind spot. I tried slowing down, tried stopping, everything went slow motion, and I just hit that mound of snow and went through the air. My brother said I probably flew like 30 feet, and the conditions were kind of crappy. It was like really warm during the day, and then so it was like kicking up all the making divots in the trails, and then it froze during the night, so there was just mounds everywhere. And
was it night skiing?
Yeah, night skiing. So it was around this one trail just has these like switchbacks, like 180 degree almost, and so you kind of book around these things, and since it's night skiing, there's shadows, you can't really see everything until you're up on top of it.
Yeah.
And so I hit that. It was weird. I saw this mound, and then everything just went slow motion. And I just remember saying, if I hit this, I'm going to die. And I just remember it sucking me in. Like I couldn't do anything about it. And it was like my life just flashed before my eyes at that point. And I came down on the nose of my snowboard, and then I hit my shoulder, and I heard a loud pop. And I thought I snapped a rib or two. I thought I broke something. So, and then, my brother and his friend were behind me. They stopped. I was just laying on the ground screaming, like face down. After I fell, I kind of slid down the hill a little bit. And my brother and his friend went to go down and get ski patrol. And so they left me there by myself. And, I'm watching all these parents go by with their kids. And I'm literally just on the ground, face down in the snow, screaming like, ugh, ugh. And nobody stopped, which kind of blew my mind. And it was the punk ass snowboarders that stopped. They stopped, asked me for a cigarette, and put their snowboards in front of me so nobody would hit me. And, it was like the type of kids that throw snowballs at you in the park.
Perfect. And then how long did it take for ski patrol to show up?
So I was on the mountain for about like 45 minutes or so. My brother and his friend came back and said, hey, nobody's coming for you. We told the lifties. They didn't seem too concerned, or, they're like, we don't know if anybody's coming. So I just literally had to wait for a random ski patroller to just patrol the trail. And, the good thing is that, it's Poconos, pretty small area. The trails aren't that big, so somebody was bound to stop by. So I was on the mountain for about like 45 minutes or so.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then what happened? Like, did you have like your big experience shortly after that?
Yeah. So they hooked me up to the toboggan. They took me down, and I remember my dad was standing there like by the first aid station. I just remember his face just dropped. I'm just laying in the back of this toboggan, and he's just like, Kyle. And right then and there, I knew something was like pretty serious. I could just tell. And so they got me to the first aid. They checked my pulses, they checked my vitals, and they kept asking me questions like, are you usually this pale? Do you usually have a pulse this low? I don't know. Yeah, I don't think so. And so they checked out my ribs. They told me, your ribs are fine. We don't think you broke anything, but since your vitals are a little low and your ribs do seem fine, we think you did internal damage. Like, we think you have internal injuries. And at that moment, I just remember going, oh shit, I'm going to die tonight. And, I wasn't a very big believer in God. And at that moment, I started praying. I was like, God, if you're real, if you're out there, I do not want to die. Like, I'm way too young for this. And it terrified me. Absolutely terrified me to think that I had some sort of internal injury at the age of 16. And so they, thankfully, they knew that it was an emergency and needed to get the helicopter. So they medevaced me out. And then by the time I got to the hospital, that's when my experience started to really unfold. I just started losing consciousness. While I was at first aid, I thought so much about death. By the time I got to the emergency room, my uncle was standing beside me, and I didn't even think about dying. Didn't even cross my mind. I just felt so overwhelmed, and it seemed like my consciousness started disconnecting from my body.
Mm-hmm. You said your uncle was there?
Yeah, so he was a first responder in Bethlehem. They live in Pennsylvania. And so just my dad called and said, hey, Wayne, like, you need to get over there. Like, Kyle just had a really bad accident. So he just thankfully. So he was standing by my side and saying, listen, Kyle, like, these are really good people. Like, you're in good hands. Like, you're going to be okay. And I just remember like the nurses and doctors, just asking me a bunch of questions, trying to get my snowboard stuff off of me. And, they're trying to take my vitals, and I'm starting to slip away at that point. And, I could hear one nurse say, we can't get his pulse. They're just jabbing me with needles nonstop, trying to get like an IV in me. And I could hear like the one nurse say, I can't get into his veins. Like, the veins in his upper body are collapsing. And, I remember them jabbing like this huge needle down in my groin, upper thigh. And at that point, I had this really I always describe it as like this empathetic feeling, or like feeling of empathy
Towards everybody there.
towards everybody there. It was like I was out of my body and I could feel all the feelings of the nurses and the doctors around, their anxiety, how afraid they were, how serious they were rushing around. And at that point, I kind of started leaving my body. It's a really weird experience to explain. You know, it's really ineffable to say you're in your body, but you're out of your body at the same time.
Was it like you were falling asleep when you were losing your consciousness?
It was like
a little bit different.
Yeah, it was like I was falling asleep, but it was also, I was becoming super aware too. You know, I remember standing there, my uncle standing there, and I remember just thinking, you know, this is it. Like, I can't take anybody with me. We walk this path alone. And, you know, even though he's a relative of mine, like I have to go by myself. And so, you know, they rushed me. They did a sonogram on me. They told me that I had massive internal bleeding, and that's why I felt really sick and why I was having so much pain. And they told me they had to do a CAT scan. And by the time they got me to the CAT scan machine, that's when I really started, I guess, leaving my body in a sense.
Right.
They put me in the CAT scan machine, and it just felt like I was submerged in a tub of ice. You know, I had no blood circulating through my body, really.
So you're freezing.
Was
it bothering you that you were that cold?
Yeah, I just wanted to go to sleep. Like, I got so tired. I was so cold. They put warming blankets all over me. Like, nothing was helping. And I remember in the CAT scan machine, I just started falling asleep and drifting away. And I could hear the doctors on the other side of the room saying, "Kyle, don't fall asleep. Just keep breathing. Just keep breathing." And at that point, I felt like I was on the other side of the room with them in that room. And I really started kind of leaving my body at that point. And I remember there was like a feeling like this like glowing orb or something around me that just said, you know, everything's going to be all right. Don't worry, you're going home. And at that point, like, I just started kind of sinking into it. It felt really beautiful. And this I don't know if it was a voice or if it was like this kind of like telepathic thing, or if I was telling myself it. But, you know, it just said, you're going home. You're going back to the stars where we all come from. And that this physical life is going to cease to exist, but you're just going through a transition. And, you know, everything's going to be okay. Just relax into it. And so I started drifting away. And, you know, I remember up to the point that they brought me into the emergency room and they wanted to perform surgery on me. They got me out and said, your spleen ruptured. You have massive internal bleeding and we need to cut you open. And so the last thing I remember was, should we use an electric razor or a straight razor? And then I just passed out. All I remember, straight razor, we gotta get him open, you know, like.
Were you having like external vision of the situation at that point, or just kind of like awareness, generally speaking, of the room?
It's so hard. I mean, you know, this happened 12 years ago at this point, but I was in both worlds, you know, I was out of my body, but I was also very in my body. I was everywhere in the room, but I was also having this experience unfold within my body as well. It felt as if I wasn't taking an external journey. It felt as if I was taking an internal journey, if that makes sense, you know, and kind of in like that psychedelic realm. You're going inside, right? And that's what it felt like to me. I was going inside, and going inside was going back to the stars in a sense.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And did it get, did anything happen before you woke up in the hospital later?
So I remember they were rolling me through back to the IC, you know, the intensive care unit. And I remember waking up, shooting up from as they were rolling me on the stretcher, I shot up and took like the biggest gasp of air. And it felt like as if my soul came back in my body. And in that split second of me taking that gasp of air and shooting straight up, I just remember hearing the doctor say, he's awake and he's cold. And I took this like huge gasp of air, sat up, and then just passed right back out. And then I woke up, like, I'm guessing like, minutes or whatever later in the intensive care unit, my family standing all around me. And I remember waking up and I was conscious that it was still New Year's Eve. And I said, "Is it still New Year's Eve?" "Yes." "Did the ball drop?" "No, it's only 9:30. And I remember, I got in the accident around 7:30. And I was like, and I was like, "Green tea. I need green tea." And the nurse was standing there and she's like, "You can't have green tea for a while, Kyle." And that was it. I just passed out. And then I woke up the next day.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
But, after waking up, I mean, that was a totally different experience of like, what the hell happened to me? Where did I go?
Yeah.
I was only in the hospital for 5 days. So, yeah, and you're on morphine. I didn't take too much of it. I didn't like the experience with it. So I just sat there in pain most of the time, just because it put me in like weird states. I just didn't like it. But
Right.
after I left the hospital after 5 days, then the experience started just unfolding even more. I had no idea where I went to. I thought I talked to God. My whole worldview just completely shifted, and I was 16. Who the hell do you talk to about this stuff when you're 16 years old? Your friends are too worried about having sex and doing drugs and doing the things that teenagers do, and I just had this crazy existential crisis.
That's interesting. And how long was it before you like found some sort of direction? Oh, yeah, we're still good. Till you found some sort of like direction with trying to sort it out, or found a book that helped, or a person or something.
Well, it was really ironic. So a year before this accident happened, I started getting into a little bit of spiritual practice. I picked up this book called Snowboarding to Nirvana. And it was about a guy that went over to Nepal and bumped into a Buddhist monk, and he taught him transcendental meditation. And so I started practicing some of that stuff a year beforehand. And
Interesting.
so then a year later, I read this book around, I think Christmas break when I was a freshman.
Right.
Christmas break, sophomore year, this accident happened. And so I always kind of joke around. I'm like, well, I guess I snowboarded to Nirvana a year later. So that was kind of like the start. And then I had an existential kind of English class. Our English teacher just did a bunch of existential philosophy and authors. And so that really helped me. And it wasn't until really after I got out of high school and started to explore, I guess, not ordinary states that really helped me get grounded. And then the people in the transpersonal realm really became my teachers. Even though I never met them, they were my teachers. And those are the people I looked up to the most.
So it was like getting into non-ordinary states then helped you ground your previous experience a little bit?
Yeah, so I was, I would say I was severely depressed, but definitely kind of feeling very suicidal. I had no idea why the doctor saved me. Coming back to this place just seemed like hell. I couldn't understand like why we as humans create all these crazy structures and then live by them and create our own misery and suffering, and it just didn't make any sense. And then I was always a big proponent of, geez, you need to go out and experience life, like there's so much to it, and our culture doesn't allow that. And so, I was just really, really depressed, I would cry myself to sleep at night thinking about, like, I wish the doctors didn't save me, because what I experienced was so beautiful. Like, coming back here just sucked. So, I experimented with alcohol a little bit. I experimented with some marijuana, but it wasn't, they kind of helped me get grounded. I think it was part of like the escape these really negative existential thoughts that I was having about what's life, why the hell am I here? But it wasn't until I came across some psilocybin mushrooms that really completely changed my life around, which, the near-death experience changed my life, but this kind of got me on, where I'm at today. I would definitely say that was the reason kind of why things shifted.
Yeah. When you, at the period of time when you were stuff started to unfold a little more for you? Was it kind of like you were remembering things that had happened? It wasn't like you had experienced them at the time or something?
You mean like after I had my accident and then things started unfolding?
Like days after. Yeah, when stuff started unfolding there.
It was
it like you were remembering it?
Well, that's the thing. I couldn't remember. I knew something was different, and I had a whole new worldview. And that's what messed with me, was not knowing where I went to and what I talked to. I just woke up, and it was like, it's like you fall asleep, and then all of a sudden you wake up to a map laying on your chest, and then all of a sudden you go, oh, wow, I get it. That's what it was like. But then it was like, well, where the heck did this map come from? Like, I have no idea. And that's what really messed with me, was how can you just be Kyle or be a person, have this really powerful experience, and then completely just have all these new thoughts, like a new perception of the world. And that, I really didn't have too many people to look towards at the time.
Who was the first person that you could have those conversations with?
I definitely tried to have them with my friends. I definitely talked to a lot of my friends about it. Everybody at school. I tried to talk to the teachers about it. But there was a point where people were just listening, and I wanted to dig deeper.
Right.
And that was the tough part. So the first person... I guess that's a really tricky question to answer, because, people were there that I was able to talk to. I guess it wasn't until I went to school, where
other kids in school.
Yeah,
probably.
And then it wasn't until after, I graduated high school, and then I had some of these other experiences. And then since I was having these experiences with peers, then, it started opening that conversation. And it wasn't until I went to college then I started to really dig into it a lot more and meet teachers and start studying more.
Did you literally die for a little while, or did you have a pulse the whole time?
I think I had a pulse for the majority, but I lost 5.5 pints of blood. And so I lost more than half my blood. Like, the doctor said I shouldn't have been alive. They said if I came in 5 or 10 minutes later, I would have been pronounced dead on arrival. So, was I clinically dead? I don't know. They didn't tell me that.
They didn't tell you. Okay.
But, I lost a significant amount of blood, and,
to me, it sounds like they would have told you if you did.
Yeah.
Flatline for a while.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much we can bring people back from even that.
Yeah. Yeah. Massive
10,
blood
20
trans.
minutes often.
They said usually around 4 pints people start really, they were surprised that,
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So did you jump into any kind of transpersonal books early in your school days?
In high school, no.
In college, was it?
I started jumping into the transpersonal stuff right after I graduated, I guess, probably around 18 or 19. I took 4 years off before going back to college, and I just worked and just had experiences. And I think the first book I picked up was Rick Strassman's book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, which I think happened after I had my psilocybin experience. So the psilocybin experience, I think, really opened me up to finding those transpersonal philosophies and those teachers. Because before that, I was just escaping. I didn't really care. I was just trying to figure out why the hell I was still alive.
Yeah. How do you end this quick so you can go on to the next thing?
Yeah. Which then, once I got into that psilocybin experience, that changed my life significantly. I took them, walked in the woods with a friend, and halfway through it, I felt like I was dying. I was like, I felt this before. This seems really familiar. And I remember just sitting down in this really narrow trail in the woods. And, I think it was on the weekend, and this place is, well known for like bike riding and stuff, like trail riding. And I don't know how nobody ran into us, but I remember sitting down on this tiny little rock in the middle of the trail, and I said, that's where I'm going to die. So I found this rock and just sat on it, and I thought I was overdosing. And this feeling just occurred. I said, oh my God, I felt this before. I know what this is. And all of a sudden the world just had a bunch of teeth, and the world just consumed me, and I blacked out. I left my body. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know my name. I didn't know literally anything about myself or the world that I existed in the physical realm. And I remember kind of doing this like traveling through space type thing, seeing star systems and whatnot. And then I started peering back. I was like, well, now it's time to come back. And I started peering into myself. And then that's when it shifted into seeing these, what McKenna talks about as the self-transforming machine elves. I saw these little green entities, and there are two of them, and they're in the cockpit of my mind, which is at that point I was like, I'm not in control of anything. Like, these elves control me, terrifying realization, of like, wow, like I have no control over anything. I'm just a robot in a sense. But, I started having interactions with these entities of some sort. And I said, wait a minute. I was like, I feel like I've been here before. And they laughed and said, yeah, thousands of times. And I was like, is this the place where I went when I died? And they said, yeah, more or less so. And I said, are you the beings or the God that I talked to that gave me all the information? And then they just kind of laughed and said, nah, more or less so. They would never give me a straight answer because they're the tricksters. And at that point, I found this parallel. I said, oh my God, like I'm in this altered state. I'm experiencing like, almost like this Bardo realm, this death realm from ingesting a mushroom, and at that point, I came back in my body, and my friend, I still don't know to this day if he was like just very in tune with me or what, but I remember opening my eyes and he just looks at me. He's like, just breathe, man. Just play. And I'm like, to this day, I'm like, how'd you know how to say that? Like, just breathe. Like it was so magical. But I just looked at him. I was like, man, I just met these entities. And he just looks at me. He's like, you're just tripping really hard, man. But, I didn't know anything about Terrence's work. I didn't know about Rick Strassman's work at the time. I didn't know about any of that stuff. And so when I came across Rick Strassman's book in the bookstore, I said, I just saw the title DMT, the spirit molecule, something mystical states and near-death experiences. And I go, wow, I need to read this. And so I picked up the book and started chewing through the material. And, then I heard Terrence talk about the machine elves. And then, you're reading about these experiences in Strassman's book and you go, wait a minute, other people have seen these things too? Like, I'm not the only one. Like, what's going on here? And so in that moment, like after I came back from that, there's just this weird parallel where I said there's a similarity between death and this psychedelic experience, and there's something there. And from that point on, like I wanted to go back to school. I wanted to get my life together. I was so thankful to be alive after that experience because it's so terrifying. I thought I died. And, coming back to the world was a blessing. I was like, oh my God, like I'm so thankful to be here. I want to do something with my life now.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Have you been back to that section of woods since?
Yeah, I have. I don't know exactly what that trail was, but I've been back to that park.
Yeah, cool.
So,
and then when did you start bumping into like Groff and holotropic breathwork?
So Groff came after another very powerful experience that I had, which left me pretty ungrounded for about 3 to 4 months. I was stuck in an experience for 3 to 4 months, which terrified me. I regretted ever doing what I did, taking a substance. And, I was absolutely terrified that it was altered for life. And so I needed a map, like the DMT experience of the mushroom was whatever. I came back to my body. It helped me kind of resolve my trauma, I guess you could say, and develop a new meaning or a new relationship to that near-death experience that I had. But the other experience that I had with this acid, it was just never ended, I just got stuck in it. So I started, who do you talk to? You start, I remember going to my doctor, like I got bit by a tick, and I think that's what caused a bad experience. Like I got bit by a tick while I was like in it, and all I kept thinking about was I was going to get Lyme disease. So, I went to my doctor and I started saying I was having these weird symptoms, and I told him what I did, and he's like, well, it depends on if the substance was pure and how much you took, and I mean, it should be worn off by now. And it's like, well, oh God, who do I talk to now about this? I don't want, people think I'm crazy for like talking about near death experiences and talking to God or whatnot, and how the hell am I going to explain this to anybody? So I was always like really cautious about who I talked to this stuff with because of the backlash I felt I had after having that accident.
Right.
It just felt like there's a lot of shame around it. Like I had it, and then people are like, well, you should be grateful for being alive. And I'm like, I am, but you don't really know what that's like to go to that other side and come back and see the world from a different perspective. So after this, 3-month, 4-month acid experience, I started looking at Ram Dass. I started reading Groff. I mean, that's what really got me to explore the territory of Groff and some of this other transpersonal stuff was that one experience. And so I relate that powerful experience to my track to actually go to school. I remember sitting there, I was 19, lifeguarding, kind of in a half daze most of the time, reading Stan's book. And I said, wow, that's what I want to do with my life. Like, I want to explore this stuff. I'm so interested in it. And, this is what I want to do. And, I think reading one chapter, he was saying that it was typical of people to get stuck in these experiences, because these are, non-specific amplifiers of mental processes. And so if people aren't actually processing, then it's not getting resolved. So I'm out hiking all day. Maybe on like the unconscious level, this material starts to process. But since I'm so focused on the external world and hiking and making sure I'm keeping up with my breath and looking out for danger, I'm not actually processing some of that material that is emerging within my psyche. So, I'm not 100% sure that's, what he said in the book, but this is what I remember from reading on that day was, that these unconscious processes just keep rolling until it's resolved. And so he always said, the best, the solution was to just give people more. And that was in the clinical setting. So, very safe setting. People could do that. Yeah. And I was very weary of doing that. I said, I'm never going to do it again. Unless I know it's pure, because I know there's a lot of tainted stuff. And, I was just so terrified. I was like, well, what if I do it again and then I don't come back? Like, that's terrifying. Like, I don't want to mess with that ever again. It was like I played Russian roulette and it was just one experience. They say that one experience changes your life. And yeah, it did. It really terrified me. So I was really nervous to go back afterwards. But, something fell into my hand and I had another experience and it helped resolve it. But, which I was grateful for. So I started getting into breath work and Stan's work after those experiences, which led me to look at transpersonal psychology programs because, hey, this is what I want to study. I really interested in these non-ordinary states and near-death experiences, and I could see the healing potential in them. So that brought me to Burlington College, because they had a bachelor's degree in transpersonal psychology. And that's where cool. I met Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson. They were doing 1 credit weekend workshops through Burlington College. And I remember just seeing the course saying holotropic breathwork, and I saw Stan's name next to it. And I was like, I remember that's the guy I read that book about. And I loved it. I'm going to sign up, So.
Did it seem to, when you started doing breathwork, did it kind of match what you were looking for? Did it seem to trigger it?
Yeah, so I went down there, and all the regular participants there, and they're like, talking about Stan and breathwork, and I'm just, who the hell are these people? Kind of thinking they're, I don't know if I really believe in this stuff. It's good to approach things with a skeptic mind, So I was very skeptical when I went down there. And I went on the second day. I think it was Halloween. It was Halloween weekend of 2010, I believe. And I went on a Sunday. So the first day I'm watching everybody kind of let loose. I'm like, what is this? Like people are like rolling around on the ground, kicking, screaming, crying. Kind of freaked me out.
Sure. Absolutely. Yes.
So my first experience was very powerful. I didn't think it was going to do anything, because I was like, I had this like near-death experience. I had these really powerful like psychedelic experiences. I highly doubt that breathing is going to be as powerful as they're telling me it's going to be. And so my first session was literally just everything combined into 3 hours, and it was probably one of the most powerful experiences that I've had. I relived this birth trauma. I felt like I was choking. I felt like I was being born. I felt like something was wrapped around my neck. I started coughing, choking, gasping for air. And then it led to my near-death experience. I went back to that realm. I met those entities, and they were like, "Hey, you need to like go back and teach and explore, and you really need to go back and teach this stuff and research more." And I said, "I don't want to do that. It sounds scary. People don't like this stuff. It's taboo." So I really, and the weird thing was like after they're like, well, you signed up for it before you were born, so you got to go back and do it. And so they gave me the boot, and I remember coming back to my body, and I shot up exactly how I shot up after I woke up from surgery. I shot up ice cold, and just a huge breath of air, gasping, and then I passed out for what seemed like an hour or two on the mat. It could have been 15 minutes, but the experience was just so powerful. It was like I relived everything, like how it went, and it helped me get back in my body. It helped me kind of resolve some of the trauma, some of the unleft answers to these questions, and it helped me get back in my body. And that's why I stuck with it, because these other techniques or experiences got me really out of my body. I didn't know how to come back, and I needed a way to come back, and breath work helped me do that.
I think that's huge, and that is actually a pretty common report. People say it's more of a body thing. It's hard to put it into, well, maybe it isn't that hard to put it into discrete words. It's like the other stuff is a little more mental, cerebral, maybe more escapist. The way it's used, the intention, the environment, setting, all that kind of stuff has a lot to do with that too.
Yeah, definitely.
But this is just by definition used that way. Used in a really great setting with well-trained folks running the show. So you have less of that. Yeah, I think it's huge. I think it's one of the cooler things we have at our disposal. And it's awesome you found it.
And the bodywork component was really helpful, that I thought, also helps get back in the body.
What was your first bodywork session like? Was it helpful?
I can't remember exactly what it was. I think like since it was my first time, I didn't get too much of it, but I did get a little bit of body work done, and I think it did help resolve some things. But yeah, that's been the huge thing. Like I go down, I do breath work, not to really seek experience, sometimes, but it's really about, for me, it's about letting some of this stuff out and learning how to integrate it. I think the integration part is key for anything. And that was the problem with like some of the psychedelic stuff or my near-death experience. I didn't have a way to integrate it. I just was left kind of just in this chaos of going, oh my God, what the hell's going on? It wasn't until like I went to college, I met a teacher who, is a shamanic practitioner and, has a Native American lineage. And, he always told me, he's like, if you lived in traditional culture after that accident, the elders would have stepped in and took you out of school and taught you the things that you needed to learn and how to integrate that experience. But unfortunately, you don't live in that culture. So you were left to fend for yourself and figure it out, which can be really dangerous, So another big interest that came out of all of this is the importance of rites of passages.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever looked at how to facilitate that for people around the ages of like 14 to 17 or something? For breath work, I guess.
I haven't, but I've done breath work here and there a little bit with some teenagers that I worked with, just very, very short, simple sessions, like 10 minutes maybe. Mm-hmm. There were people I had a relationship with, maybe, the program I worked at was pretty quick. But, maybe it was their second or third time there. And I was like, you seem like maybe you want to step up a bit and try something new. But there is a place in Vermont that does rites of passages, summer camp, and they do breath work there. So it's something that I always want to kind of get involved in and see what they're doing. It seems really interesting. But
yeah, that would be really neat to run stuff like that.
Yeah.
People are talking about that with more and more frequency, I think. It's pretty well established that people think kids need something other than recreational drugs and, being rowdy teenagers.
Yeah.
What if you got prepared for your teenage years a little bit before you got in there?
Right. Yeah. And what if like you had the support, people telling you that here, like this is going to happen and this is a way to prepare for it and we'll help you through it. Whereas like, as a teenager nowadays, you get shamed, you get punished, you're going to go explore. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. Like you're figuring out what the world is and you're going to explore. You're going to try substances, even though your parents told you not to do them, you're going to get curious eventually, maybe not, some people don't. But whether that's maybe, getting in your car for your license and going 100 miles an hour down the highway, or, I worked with a lot of kids that self-harmed. I mean, it's all ways to alter your consciousness and dance with death in a way. So, I mean, it's part of life, and if we accept that and you have techniques that are generally, like breath work could be generally safe. You don't need to do it like this intense thing. You could modify it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I personally think kids starting at age 12, 13 are largely ready to jump into that arena if they had like some sort of parental structure, family structure that could like, help them with it later.
Yeah.
Or at least people they could reach out to on a fairly regular basis about it.
Yeah.
Even if their family wasn't there.
Yeah, and I think that's why I really liked working with the teenagers because, they're going through these extraordinary experiences of some sort and don't really know who to talk to about it. Or you get the people that just don't act like, I don't know, I always think sometimes when you're exploring, you want to go into dark places and, sometimes people are afraid to go into dark places.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to do that. That's scary.
Yeah, but you got to approach it with caution. You got to know that you're capable of going in there yourself. You don't want to go in there unprepared or untrained. That could be dangerous to somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are we at? We're only at 44 minutes. So, what else could we talk about? Let's talk about your time at Burlington College, this transpersonal psych program, and the class you kind of co-taught near the end.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, what happened there?
So during my course at Burlington College, I just kind of submerged myself in researching psychedelic therapy, indigenous cultures, you know, the way like shamanic cultures would use these substances in healing or any sort of like non-ordinary state. And so that was like my real main focus. I got interested in like plant medicine and, you know, not just, you know, big teacher plant medicine, but, you know, plant medicine that's just around here. Like, you know, dandelions, good for your liver, you know, they're bitter. So, you know, I just got interested in all that type of stuff. And, you know, it came to degree project. You have to do a capstone project at Burlington College, which I think is pretty cool. And I wasn't too sure what I really wanted to do. I kind of was really interested in the plant medicine stuff. So I thought maybe making like an herbalism book or, you know, I spent some time out in Hawaii doing like a course in shamanism and plant medicine, which was awesome. It was with Kat Harrison.
Great.
Which was really cool to do that with. And another woman that runs teaches at the herbalism school up here in Vermont. And so I was really interested in that. I spent a summer with an Abenaki elder around here. The Abenaki are the First Nations people that are around Vermont. And so, you know, she taught me how to use some of the local plants and how to make medicine. So that was like a really big interest of mine. I think it was also kind of part of my healing path of wanting to know the landscape which I lived in and how to use it for food and healing. But by the time the degree project rolled around, I was like, man, but I don't know if I really want to do that. And something was just like, make a class, you know, like the 1 credit workshops got cut because I think federal funding or something like that. So at that point I was like, man, like we can't lose like the connections with the Gibsons. Like, you know, I wasn't too sure if that would get lost, but just thinking that, oh man, that's like 1 credit courses won't get offered. Will they have weekend workshops? And I was like, well, there's got to be a way, like if I do a 3 credit workshop, then we can integrate a breathwork retreat into a 3 credit class. Like that'd be awesome. I had a really cool advisor at the time and she was like, that sounds awesome, Kyle. Like, let's do it. And I think she kind of knew she was on her way out or, you know, life was happening. And so she pulled some strings and got the class approved and submitted. And so I just worked on it. I did the whole syllabus. I pretty much just created the whole thing with the help with, you know, my faculty and advisors, and ended up just doing all the research behind it. So I ended up with like, you know, almost like a book of what I wanted to talk about, stemming from like the healing state, the healing potential of non-ordinary states, going back and looking at shamanism, looking at how they use plants, and then looking at like, you know, the beginning of like depth psychology, Freud, Jung, and then getting into Stan's work and breath work, and then the history of psychedelic psychotherapy, and then, you know, just went through history. And so something that was really interesting, like after getting all this done, so I called the class this Stanislav Grof Psychology of Extraordinary Experiences. It was mostly based around Stan's work. And, you know, obviously I wanted to incorporate breath work into it and have a retreat. So, but the real interesting thing was Elizabeth afterwards said, wow, Kyle, you know, like, remember your first breathwork session? Like, what those entities told you, like you're doing it, you're teaching. And I go, oh yeah, that is so weird that like I had this breathwork experience like 3 years prior. And then, you know, all of a sudden my degree project comes up and I've created a class and, you know, in this role of teaching about non-ordinary states and extraordinary experiences and the importance of ritual and ceremony and stuff like that. And it was cool, you know, since Elizabeth is Elizabeth and Lenny have the connection with Stan. They were able to, he was willing to do a question and answer through Skype. And I remember just sitting there going, wow, I was 19 sitting at the pool reading, this guy's book. And then, a couple of years later, he's Skyping in with us. And I just made a class about his work, which was really cool. So that kind of helped build a little bit of foundation to get, some of this stuff integrated back into the school. And then Lenny and I ended up doing a history of psychedelics course the following year. That one didn't incorporate any breath work, but it was just like an overview of the history.
That's awesome. So, and now you're doing some graduate work in somatic psychology.
Somatic psychology, yep.
That's cool. And what's like the quick and dirty
how I got into that,
or to define it?
So somatic comes from soma, so body. So it's more of like a body-oriented psychology. There's so many practices within somatic psychology that I guess, there could be so many different ways to define it. But the reason why I went into it was because of my experience with breath work and body work. And I wanted to expand a little bit more on body work. And just that theory that we hold so much trauma and emotion in our body, I think not incorporating the body or working with the body I shouldn't say. I think it should be integrated. So an example, and I think this is what got me on the path to look at somatics. I was getting some physical therapy done on this scar tissue that I have from, my emergency surgery. I have this huge scar up my stomach, and, I have some scar tissue and probably some adhesions that's pulling on certain things. So I finally got around to try and do some physical therapy. And I remember, I forget if they were doing myofascial release or, something. They were working on the scar tissue. And all of a sudden, I just felt like I was back in the stretcher and they were rolling me through the emergency room. And all this emotion and all this memory started coming up, and coming from the breathwork realm, like, yeah, I don't know, whatever, like this is normal. Like I'm just going to breathe into it. And I kind of want to cry and I kind of want to get some of this out, but I'm in a physical therapy office. Like, I don't really know if they're down for that. So, I asked the therapist, I was like, is it normal for people to cry when you're doing physical therapy on them? And she's like, yeah, people cry every once in a while, stuff comes up. And I was like, I was like, well, how do you hold space for that? And she's like, oh, you just kind of let it unfold. And in my mind, I'm like, man, tell them to breathe into it, like work in it in a different way, like really hold that space for people to process. And it could be I feel like could be like really cathartic and releasing, because like that stuff was coming up and I wanted to act that way. But, that's for breath work. It would feel really weird just to start crying and doing all this stuff in a physical therapy office. So, I was thinking about it. I was like, man, if I could do some sort of body work, getting with therapy, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm. That's super cool. And I think there's a lot of value there. Could you, for the whole world, can you imagine if every physical therapist knew how to hold space for that? So
I think it would be
process it at game time.
Yeah, because if you think about on the emotional level, if you're storing some of this emotional energy in there, you think about breath work, like it wants to be resolved. And if you're working with the body and emotion is coming up and it's not being resolved, is it just going right back in there? Instead of kind of just like releasing and flushing out.
Yeah, you're kind of reinforcing the repression a little bit, I guess, if you're holding it back.
Yeah. So when I was out in orientation, the teacher or the advisor was telling a story about how somebody went to massage, a very similar thing. Getting a massage, emotion comes up, they start crying, they start reliving some stuff, and then they say, hey, can you help me process it? And the massage therapist, well, ethically I'm not allowed to do that because I'm not a counselor. Go to your therapist and process. So they go to their therapist and then they said, well, I don't know, nothing's really coming up. Can you massage me? Can you touch me? The therapist says, well, I'm not ethically allowed to touch you. I can't do that. So then you're just stuck in limbo, you go, well, I just want to process this stuff, but nobody's legally or ethically allowed to do so. So I think combining and going towards a somatic approach, there's a lot of somatic techniques that do involve touch and maybe a little bit of body work with the counseling aspect as well. So,
absolutely. Otherwise you have to somehow coordinate with the massage person and your therapist to be in the same room with you.
Same room, yeah.
How does that fly?
How does that work? Yeah. I mean, you could probably do it, but it's just more resources needed.
Yeah, that's a lot. And that's another thing that's great with breath work is it's so efficient, cost efficient for the breather, because it's a group thing. And the group itself is actually a huge value add too, I think. Like I did a little bit of like one-on-one therapy, and I didn't think it was, all that great relative to my experiences in a group.
Yeah.
Which is like, it felt 20x more powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're sharing it with like maybe peers that are going through it with you, and you can kind of empathize with each other and kind of know what you're going through. And I always go back to like what Lenny says whenever he talks about group process. He's like, we're the descendants of very successful tribes, we need the group to survive.
It's really nice to have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So we're coming up on an hour. I don't know. Do you want to throw anything else in? I think we covered a lot of the big points.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we went around and covered a bunch. So
awesome.
No, I don't think
we're going to keep doing it.
We're going to keep talking to other guests. So I'm sure we'll hear more of my story and your story as well.
Yeah. I think this is actually a really cool format, and we should do it more than I originally thought we would. Just you and I, maybe every 4 or 5 episodes do just us,
some
chatting on
and whatnot.
Stuff that's happened, stuff that's going on. Because always plenty to talk about.
Always. Yeah.
Especially in this field, there's a lot of taboo subjects that don't get discussed enough. And I think we're in a place where we can raise a lot of it, which is cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited about it and see where things go.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Psychedelics Today with Kyle Buller. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did enjoy it, please tell your friends, and if possible, subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher, or if you're feeling really generous, leave us a review on iTunes. We'd really like to keep this going, and reviews on iTunes would really help us out a ton. Thanks for your attention, and I hope we shared some useful information with you. Have a great rest of your day. Hope you tune in again soon. Bye-bye.